Hello and welcome. We let people filter on in. We welcome you to the 13th annual Kingston Writers Fest. Welcome, welcome. My name is Trisha Knowles. I am the Director of Marketing and Event Sponsorship for Kingston Writers Fest, and very pleased to welcome you to our new After Dark or Late Night series and event number 21, Brave New Words, a Dark Debut. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and where I sit tonight is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of the land and agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'd like to thank the Canada Council, Canadian Heritage, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Kingston and Kingston Arts Council for their ongoing support of the festival, especially in this virtual format. We are so grateful to those organizations and to the individuals who support the festival. Kingston Writers Fest would especially like to thank Secrétariat du Québec aux Relations Canadiennes, government sponsor for this event. Late Nights with Kingston Writers Fest, sponsored by Mark Sinnett and Cheri Rose Genyk, Royal LePage, ProAlliance Realty, AKA for the locals, machines for living in, and Centre Culturel Frontenac, our arts partner for this event. I want to let you know the event is an hour long. It includes a question and answer period towards the end, but do feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any point during the event, and our moderator will direct your questions accordingly. I would encourage you to look at the bottom of your screen for the Q&A button. That will be, make sure that your question does get seen rather than typing it directly into the chat. And of course, if you'd like to support our authors, please check out their books at our official bookseller, Novel Idea, in downtown Kingston. They have copies available for you to purchase in store, by phone, or online. And if you are out of area, please do try to support your local independent bookseller if at all possible. Now, I am absolutely delighted to introduce this event's moderator, Aara Macauley. Aara has been involved with Kingston Writers Fest in various capacities since 2011. She is a true bibliophile and holding a Bachelor of Honors in Classical Studies, a Master's in Latin Literature from Queen's University. It's really not surprising her involvement began as a patron of Kingston Writers Fest. At the time, she owned and operated a boutique selling primarily local Canadian and independently created art, clothing, and jewelry, which none will find surprising given her flair for artistic expression. And that openness is what makes her uniquely her. In 2014, she joined the staff in an administrative role, becoming operations manager in 2017. And then just this past December, we were so excited to find out that she would become our new artistic director. Striving to provide greater access to and awareness of our community's diversity through the arts, she is past chairperson of the Real Out Arts Project Board of Directors and has been involved in the fundraising, event planning, and promotion committees for various local cabaret, film, and arts festivals, many in which I've had the tremendous privilege of working with her. This After Dark, or the Late Night series, is in a way Aara's personal stamp on the festival, aiming to explore subject matter often omitted from a typical literary gathering or your general table conversation. Aara has an ability to not only hold space for alternative voices, but to encourage those voices to be loud, to be proud to tell their story, and she will be the first to applaud without a drop of judgment. Knowing her and working alongside her through this journey has been a most tremendous joy. And to call her a friend is an honor. Please welcome Artistic Director of Kingston Writers Fest, Aara Macauley.
Thank you, Tricia. That was absolutely beautiful and incredibly flattering. Yes, I'm very excited, obviously, to be helming the festival this year, despite the strangeness that that brings. But yeah, the late nights idea was one that was particularly exciting to me. It's probably not any secret that when I have been on the programming committee for the festival, I tend to gravitate towards the experimental fiction, the weird and the beautiful. And I really was excited about the opportunity to introduce that to readers. And when Biblioasis sent us a copy of Kevin's book and I started reading it, it only took me a couple of pages to really appreciate how unique and exciting this was. So I'm very thrilled to have him join us today. And without further ado, I will invite Kevin to the event, and he's going to do a reading. But first, I'd like to introduce him. So Kevin Lambert has been hailed as one of the most celebrated and controversial writers to come out of Quebec in recent memory. His first novel, Tu aimeras ce que tu as tué, was widely acclaimed, won a prize for the best novel from the Saguenay region, and was a finalist for Quebec's Booksellers Prize. His second novel, Querelle de Roberval, was nominated for 4 literary prizes, was a finalist for France's prestigious Prix Médicis and the literary prize of the Paris newspaper Le Monde. The English translation of Kevin's first novel, You Will Love What You Have Killed, was released this year. La Presse calls it a powerful, inventive first novel midway between a memoir and a fantasy novel. Funny and violent, unbelievably freewheeling even as it remains under tight control. And Le Devoir praises the book as wildly strange, but also furiously enthralling. Kevin grew up in Chicoutimi, Quebec, and now lives in Montreal. Please welcome Kevin Lambert.
Hello. Does it work?
It works. So,
okay, cool.
Yes, welcome. And I'm delighted to have you here. And I think you said you were going to do a reading from the start of the book, if you wanted to.
Yeah, sure. The part I want to read is like, I think it's the second chapter, and it's like a very short chapter that is a little bit different from the rest of the book, that presents the city of Chicoutimi, the city where the action takes place, and the city where I'm from. So it's called Commercial Advantages. It's beautiful. I will read it with my like Chicoutimi French accent. So it's beautiful, Chicoutimi. There's a lot of broken glass and rivers wherever you go. A special place to grow up, really, with a blessed peace of its neighborhoods. You can count on the person next door. There are dogs that bark at night, the smell of manure when the wind blows into the city from where it spread over the fields in La Terrière. Beautiful parks, a bicycle path, lot of conveniences. There are the lights on Boulevard Talbot. There's the Sainte-Anne Bridge, green and rusted over the wide, majestic Saguenay. You can cross it on foot, and oh, the pleasure. There are the neighborhoods, des Oiseaux, des Jardins, Domaine du Roi, le Quartier des Écrivains, Rivière-du-Moulin, Le Bassin, Centre-Ville, Murdoch, Côte-Réserve, and the others. I don't know them all, and I'm not going to do a Wikipedia just to describe my native city. There are also the parts outside, Chicoutimi Nord over the bridges, and the other towns and villages, L'Abbé, Jonquière, Saint-Honoré, and so on. You can find everything in Chicoutimi, whatever you want to get at Place du Royaume, at Walmart, or at the big Canadian Tire, or at Club Price going up Talbot towards the Parc des Laurentides. There's a great Rona next to Club Price, a big club piscine, one of the biggest. Or else there's Place du Saguenay, but there's not much left of it since Zeller's closed, except for the hairdressers and the Laura Secours. Zeller's was replaced by a big IGA, twice as big as the old one. It's funny, but it's as if people aren't going to the shopping center so much since IGA moved in. Before people went there to walk, they could spend the day there, eat at the Chinese buffet, and have macaroni and cheese and a soft drink at the Little Zeller's restaurant, get an ice cream cone at La Soccer. But since it's become a grocery store, people hang out less. They just go to buy food, and often the car is loaded down when they leave. Sears, at the other end, is doing pretty well too. The IGA on one end, Sears on the other, and the Chinese buffet between the two, which also does okay when it's not shut down for being unsanitary. Our food stores can be beat. It's true that the Bay closed down with its really neat Maxi, but in Chicoutimi we have at least 2 metros, a couple of Intermarché, a big IGA, a big Lobla, a Maxi, a Super C. The Corneau Quentin too, but they're expensive and are always on the verge of going bankrupt. Still, when you get your Publisac at the beginning of the week, you can find good bargains. There's also Tanguay, which isn't bad, a huge Gagnon Frère with an escalator, the Bureau en Gros, an Amer Dessert, all the dealerships except for luxury cars, 3 Tim Hortons, soon to be 4, a Super Pacini where you can make your own toast, a Casa Grecque with a salad bar, a Scores with a nice salad bar too, a great new Jean Coutu across from the other Jean Coutu, but twice the size. In fact, we're up there with just about anybody, even people in Quebec City. A great Winners, a Pennington, an H&M that's coming soon. I grew up in the Desoiseaux neighborhood behind the Place du Royaume, not far from the Rivière du Moulin Park. When we were out of bread or milk, the IGA was as close as the corner store. That was before it moved to Place du Saguenay, where Zellers used to be. Voilà.
Thank you, Kevin. That's such a, I love that you chose that passage because it's probably one of the most normal passages in the book. And I think it sets up the narrator very well. No matter what happens in the book, there is that he presents it in that very kind of nonchalant, straightforward way. And I think it's what makes the book so effective in a way, in that there are some incredibly surprising and shocking things that happen, but they don't shock and surprise the narrator. And I think like it's an interesting creative choice, I think, for someone reading it to be given everything in that very nonchalant choice or way. And I wonder like how you decided on the voice of the narrator.
Mm-hmm. I think it became, of course, more naturally, and it wasn't like planned to be like that necessarily. But I think it's a kind of symptom, this choice of narration, because it's like writing about like childhood memories. Like this book is about my childhood, but I translated and masked like my real life in a sense to present it in like in a more oblique way. And I think this kind of like detachment maybe in the voice is linked to something that narrator feels. It's like if he cuts himself from what he feels because it's too hard, it's too big, it's too like painful. So he becomes a little bit like cold and factual, but with this maybe like ironical look on his hometown and the people that lives in.
And it's like it's hard to know what to say to not give away spoilers, but it's hard. Like he's a child, but he knows so much more than a child, and I think you sort of realize why as the book goes on. But there is a really interesting sense of, I think I, as a reader, never quite knew like what period is this happening in. like what time is this happening in? Because there are references to some things that feel like the 80s or 90s. There are references to really modern technology. And like, was that an intentional way of like increasing that sort of tenuous grasp on reality, do you think? Or?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be like too like I didn't wanted this book to be realistic. I wanted to like work with what is realism, what we think is realism, how we conceive it, and it's hard to find a definition of realism that is not like the way like the majority sees things. It's like it's hard to justify realism in another way, and I didn't want like the point of view of the narrator is it's a minority point of view. So I think I wanted to like work with this thing even in the way that reality is presented itself. And so yeah, the book doesn't have a realistic I don't know aesthetic, but and yeah, with the references but the only things that maybe you can know what time it happens is like historical moments. For example, there is like a September 11 at a point. So like these moments are like more direct reference to the context, but it's true that like in other chapters, and even I wanted to work with the language so that it sounds sometimes like if a child could talk or write, but also sometimes like with almost a archaic voice, like more almost biblical and like more I don't know, literary, because the character has like inspirations and visions. So in these moments the voice becomes more like archaic and strange. So yeah, the mix of temporalities was something that interested me in writing.
And I think my sense in reading it is that sort of that mix increases and expands dramatically as the book goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, like in one way, you are losing your grasp on reality as you are realizing the reality of Fall d'Histoire and all of his friends, and realizing what is actually happening in their lives. And you talk about sort of the biblical, and I wanted to talk about some of the character names. So of course, like Fall d'Histoire is not a common name, and I guess like the best way to describe it is like it's like a bishop's folding stool. So it's like this very ornate, you know, you could imagine like this gilded, ornate, wooden carved stool with like a velvet seat on it. And where did that come from?
Yeah, I like the fact that it's like something that bishop sits on. So, and like the book is a lot about like children that are like ignored, abused by adults of Chicoutimi. And but also in French, Fall d'Histoire, you can almost hear like histoire, of course, like history, and Fall, like it sounds a little bit like crack, fi. So to my ear, it sounded like crack in history, and I liked this this sound that you could hear in the name. And of course, it was another way of like bringing a like. Of course, this character is the closest to me, even if it's not me, and there are many things that. But it's the closest. But there is another character in the book that has my name, for example, but is not. He doesn't look like me. So I think with in this game of names, I wanted to like maybe it's like a clue to tell people that like if you want to understand what's real or what's autobiographical in this book, it's like this material, autobiographical material, has suffered the same like twitching or modification that the name of the book. So
right, yeah. Does that carry over to Christine as well? Because
Yeah,
the closest I could get was like, that's kind of like a hash brown or something, is it?
yeah, it's like something that's made to be eaten, and the character gets eaten.
Right. Yeah. um, one of the things, you know, I think one of the themes of the book is there's this, you know, on the one hand, like nothing there, it's like they're paraphrasing, you talk about the fact that like no history, or history very rarely happens in Chicoutimi, and it's a very nice place to grow up in that section that you read, and yet so many terrible things happen. And my sense, like, so I grew up in a small town as well, and there is that sense of just pushing everything under the carpet, at the same time as everybody knows. So I wonder if you could talk about that kind of contrast between like the whispered secrets and the stories that nobody tells.
Yeah, I think it's an experience many people who grew up in like small places felt, this kind of hypocritical way of dealing with like bad things. And like I don't know, for in my family, like often um, like family traumas, it's always like you don't have, you cannot talk about them. Like the best way of dealing with them is like to keep the secrecy, and to erase it, and to do as if nothing never happened. And so I think I wanted to like reflect, question myself about this particular things. And I think I wanted to question it also in like a historic way. Like it's more of a background maybe in the book. There are some chapters about this, but for me it's also about like the the settler culture, like the settler culture where I grew up. It's like the region where I'm from is was settler colonized, was colonized kind of late. It was like in the 1850s and after. So in the Quebec, it's one of the latest place. But I always had the sense that people like didn't know the history of that. I didn't know myself, but I found it weird, like the way people talked about the past, and the way we teachers taught us like history. And so I think this kind of hypocrisy is also related to that, and like this violent past that you obliterate, and that all the culture and all the education is meant to hide.
And yet there are literal cracks and fault lines under the city, and it seems like the children are the most aware of them, and most aware of like how much damage they that can really do. And I think that's a really interesting thing too, because I think it speaks to that idea of yeah, the parents try to hide these secrets, but the kids, they're not stupid. They know they're happening, and they know the damage that they can cause. One of the things, I mean, obviously, destruction is a theme in the novel, but specifically the beauty of destruction and the destruction of beauty. And I thought those were really interesting things. You have, I just wanted to highlight it. You have a section where you talk about literature, and if I can find it, talking about, I've hated men in general, especially those who write books, shitty books that never go beyond their sad fiascos. And then further down on that page, say, I've not liked many people, to tell the truth, except for some writers, certain girls, and a few homos who write wild stuff you can pick up for $2 from among the library's rejects. Men, women, and faggots who aren't who aren't obsessed with questions of substance and who strive with every sentence to demolish beautiful things prized for no reason. And I absolutely love that. And I wondered if you could talk about that more.
Yeah, it's I think my relationship to literature, in a sense, that I put in the word of the character. And also it's true, like the first book of like a gay author that is important to me, that's called Hervé Guibert. I don't know how much he's well known in like Canada or in English, but it's a French writer that was very important, one of the first to write about AIDS, that was living with AIDS and that died.
That's like, one of the books that Fell de Soir.
Yeah, that's it. And that is true in my life. Like I found this book, the first one I read it in the book that the libraries like
the giveaway pile.
The giveaway, yeah, that's it. And I found it like interesting that
right.
that like those books are the first one together to be given away. So yeah, I don't know. I feel writing this book, I was like thinking about, like, when you write, you establish something, like you build something, but like building is also like a kind of imperialistic act. It's an act of authoritarianism, and we know that like our imaginaries and like many bad things about our like present cultures come from phantasmatic stories, schemes, characters that we just take for granted. So I was trying to like, it's an impossible project, of course, but like that's why it's interesting, I think, because you can only fail to do this. But I was trying to find an aesthetic that doesn't build, or that doesn't like work as a mythology, or that doesn't want to be like a foundation for, I don't know, like a project, positive things, but also an aesthetic that welcomes destruction and like all those more regressive impulses that are also important, like even politically. And that yeah, I think I that was something that was like in my head when I wrote. But of course I don't know if it's possible to like, because writing is always like putting something on paper, and like there's something like eminently positive in writing, because there is nothing and therefore there is something. Right. But I think at least you can give place in what appears. You can give a little place to like what needs to be destroyed and deconstructed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's I mean, probably the more conservative the individual, the more this is true, but there's that fear of, you know, well, I mean, you look at the like fear of tearing down statues because they'll forget history, right? And it's the sense that, or the argument that some things do deserve to be destroyed, and sometimes the only way that we can make space for something new is to get rid of what was established. And just you know, history in and of itself doesn't make something inherently good, you know. No. So I liked that idea. I also I know this is your first book to be translated into English, and I find it really fascinating because Quebec literature seems to be its own little microcosm, and it produces such interesting and creative work. Like I think of some of the books that I've read over the last few years, like Catherine Leroux's The Party Wall, and you know, Samuel Archibald and Bertrand Laverdure, and there seems to be a lot more fantasy and horror and violence and literature, like literary work, like all combined together, and there doesn't seem to be that anxiety about making a neat little package. And I wonder, like, if you feel like there is a difference between the literature that Quebec puts out versus the rest of Canada.
it's a hard question. uh, I I find it hard because like I'm so into, I think, Quebec literature that I don't see it as a one thing. I see it as like many like project and many tendencies and like people that do something, that the people that do like opposite things. And so I have difficulties to generalize, and at the same time I think I don't have a like a strong enough perspective on like uh, English literature of Canada. But I feel I like, for example, I don't know, I can take a like more classical example, but often like literature from Montreal, for example, or like English literature from Quebec is not that much different from like French literature. And that's also interesting because, like, for example, if you take Mordecai Richler, which is like a important writer and so on, well known, uh, you can compare like his books and see that like characters that Victor Lévy-Beaulieu or Michel Tremblay described at the same time. So it's interesting because like they were living in the same city, and even if the project are of course individual and personal, often I don't see like I just want to say that it's also interesting to like reverse the point of view and like see what's common in like different uh, in what like different author write in the same city. But I'm just trying to like avoid your question that is very interesting but too hard for me to answer.
Yeah, I mean it's philosophy, so there's no right or wrong answers for that. I suppose I mean obviously queer identity is a big thing in this novel, and I guess I appreciated the honesty in which sort of the character sort of comes out to the audience and sort of comes out on the page as well. And the way that it addresses the bullying and the self-hatred and the acceptance and the beauty and the ugliness of that. I wondered if you could talk about like Faldespoir's relationship with Almanac,
Mm-hmm.
which starts with him giving him a bloody nose because
Yeah.
it's so beautiful that, you know.
Yeah, well, it's like the first time I think the character like discover his desire, his reaction is like because of like shame, is to hate the character that he desire, that is called Almana. But they will like find each other like later on, like in high school, and have their first relationship together. And yeah, it's weird because like I started writing this novel, I was young. I was maybe 22 or 21. I don't remember exactly, but and I made, it's stupid to talk like that, but I made my coming out kind of late. But it's like it's a judgment, and I don't know, my psychologist says I shouldn't say this. But anyway, so I was like 20 maybe when I made that, because I come from a really like homophobic place. Like Chicoutimi was really where I grew up, was really homophobic, and high school and everything. So it's weird because I wrote it at a time that like it was kind of new to me, to like acceptance of queer identity. And I think it's, for me, from my point of view, yeah, I can see it in the book because there is like all this queer meaning and like some queer scenes, but at the same time, it's really like, it's not like that much. I don't insist that much in about this in this book in particular, I think. Mm-hmm. And now, like for example, the book I wrote after it is like really more sexual and like it's like homosexuality and queer identity is central in the intrigue, for example. But at the time I wrote this one, it was like, I don't know if the position I could have about it was like thought like it's there, but it's not like, I don't know, the center of it's also metaphorical, and it's also
it's I mean, sometimes it's just scenes like François being brought to a strip club, you know, which
a straight strip club.
Yeah, a straight strip club, and you know, obviously his dad must suspect something, right? You know, because he's trying to buy him lap dances, and I think again, grew up in small town Northern Ontario. There wasn't even an openly gay person at my high school, and so I think maybe me reading it, I totally identified with those parts, because I felt like that's an experience that a lot of us had growing up, where it's like, you know, this confusion and the shame, and you see the kids that are open, like Pierre-Luc, be bullied and teased, and you don't want to be part of that, and you're also confused because you don't have anyone to look to. So I thought that was very very naturally written into it. One other thing I wanted to talk about, because I mean, the graveyard plays pretty heavily in the book, but the toads in the graveyard, and like, they're such an interest, like they're almost a character. They're so present in who they do and they don't visit. And I wondered if you could talk about where the inspiration for the toads came from.
It comes from a really precise place. It's a book from Jacques Ferron, which is a Quebec writer, that's called the Saint Elias. And there is one sentence in the Saint Elias about like black crosses in a cemetery with like frogs or that jump in the grass. Like, it's like one sentence. And I don't know why, but this, like, sometimes when you read a book, there is like one sentence like this that stays with you, and you don't know why. And this sentence like obsessed me. So I wanted to like kind of sample it for my book, like a sample in music. So I took the sentence and I like cut it, and I modified every parts, and I used it like as a kind of like a refrain, like in a song that comes back at certain times, because there are a lot of deaths in the book, like the child die non-stop. So but at every death almost there is like those frogs that come back, and it was almost like it was really I and other aspects of the book worked like that too, but I was inspired by how like hip-hop music works in a creative way, like with this sampling, and I was also inspired by like how I don't know what to say it in English. Kathy Acker, Kathy Acker. It was just like a New York punk writer. Well, she does like pirate literature. So she takes, for example, classics, and she writes it like her own way, and like makes them explode. And so I was interested with like those modes of writing that steal some things and like transform them to become like to appropriate them.
I mean, it's a really striking vision. It's not giving anything away, as you say. There are a lot of deaths of children in their novel, and they come back as ghosts pretty quickly in the story. The adults that die don't come back as ghosts, and I wondered if you can talk about that, like. Because it's not that some of the adults that pass away aren't restless spirits, and yet they don't get that opportunity or that curse, or however you want to see it. But yeah, I wondered if you could talk about that.
Yeah, for me it was like the children like come back because they have something to do, like they have to make their revenge, and like the storyline will be about this revenge. So, and also I think they come back because of like this kind of injustice that caused their death. and yeah, I don't know, and I think it's just like to, I don't know, to express something about like those feelings. I think are really linked to childhood, and like the feeling of like sensing that like all the world is against you, and that like the world that you were thrown in is like rotten and like corrupted, and like against like all, not only against you but against your generation, or like children.
Yeah, because I mean the world, or Chicoutimi specifically in this novel, is almost like, it's almost like the city itself is a predator against innocence and against the children, and their fate almost seems inescapable.
Yeah.
When they do return, they go back to school, and you see them growing up, like going through elementary school and high school, and living their lives when they're not living their lives. It's this really bizarre thing, and I think it's a really effective way of showing how much they lost by having their stories. And when they do, when you see these loves and these heartbreaks and these like everyday experiences that they have, and yet another part of you knows they're not having them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really
and also I think it was a way for me to like metaphorize like maybe what trauma is like. Like I experienced like trauma when I was really really young, and I think I kind of lived after that as a ghost. I felt myself as like less a real person, like when I was a child, and like before like yeah, a child. So and I think like all my childhood I spent it like but like a big part of my childhood I spent it like always feeling like disconnected from myself, from my body, almost at the side of myself, like side by side with myself. And but for me it was normal, and like it's just recently that talking about it like and working on this feeling that like I learned that that's called like anxiety, and that it's not normal. It's just
right.
like you
Well, disassociation, I think. I think we're, as a like in this day and age, becoming more aware of what trauma is and the impacts of it, right? Like, and how it manifests itself. And so it does become a really powerful metaphor, because these characters are so disassociated from, like, they're as disassociated from your life as you can be, because they're not actually living. So yeah, that's really interesting. I just want to say we're getting to about 15 minutes left in the event. So I'm going to invite, if anybody in the audience would like to ask questions, to enter them in the Q&A. And I will keep an eye on that if you have questions for Kevin about the book or anything like that. In the meantime, I'm going to just keep asking them until then. So this is, as we've mentioned before, your first, I mean, you've written 2 books, but your first book to be translated into English. What has the reception been like in English-speaking Canada to the book?
Like the book came out during the pandemic, so I feel like I didn't have like the real experience of like I made like a few interviews like this one, and like there was some papers and so on, but I kind of felt like it's didn't quite came out, or like it's like I don't know, it was a weird thing to have a book coming out during the pandemic. So I don't know how it was, how the reception exactly was, except from like the people I spoke to and the the articles that I read.
You had
and it's coming like sorry, I just thought,
oh no.
and it's funny because it's coming out like this autumn in France.
Oh wow.
So like it's funny because like the same book, you feel like you live multiple like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and very different audiences in each place.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
And in France, my second book came out there first. And so
oh
this one comes after, which is really weird because like for me it's like it's my it's my child book. It's
yeah,
like yeah.
your freshman effort.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's translated by Donald Winkler, and we've actually had him at the festival before talking about translation. But I, I, my sense, like he did a beautiful job, and I wondered if you could talk about that process.
Mhm.
Like, obviously, you've got a copy of it in English, and what did you think seeing it? Like, do you feel like he was faithful to the way that you were describing it?
Yeah, and I work with him also because like I use a vocabulary that is like typical from the region I grew up, for example. So like even for people from Montreal, like some words are weird. So like for Donald, which is like an Anglophone, it's so we worked together, and it was really interesting. Well, I think one thing I really like about his work on this book is how he kept like the rhythm of the sentence and the like orality of the character also. And you know, in translation, you often say that for example, translation from French to English, like sometimes they get criticized because, for example, you feel too much the French in the English, or like sometimes it's something you hear sometimes, but I think you feel the French in the English in this book. But I'm happy that that it is. I think it's interesting because it's like in French it's really like it's close from it's not like there is a lot of orality and like peculiar expression that I use or I use as a child. And so I was really I find it really interesting how Donald like kept like the the French voice and the like aussi like Saguenay voice in the book in English. And I don't quite understand how he does that because yeah, it seems pretty tough from my
Yeah,
point
I
of
mean,
view.
yeah, and this is me nerding out, as Trisha mentioned before. Like I did a Latin literature degree, so translation is really interesting to me. But it can, I mean, a bad translation can absolutely ruin a book.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think he's done a great job with it. I have to say, like the very opening paragraph, when you talk about Madame Marcel and the term her ruptured authority, I think that was what sold me right there. And I wondered, was that what you had written in French?
I don't remember. Son autorité failée. Yeah, in French it was son autorité failée. So yeah, like there was a really similar expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and going back to the sort of malevolent undercurrent of the town. I mean, there are some okay teachers in the book, but they seem like they want harm to come to the kids. Like you talk about the kids going down on the slide, and the teachers are hoping that one of the kids is going to crack his chin open on the cement block just so that they can all laugh and have something to talk about. And is it awful to ask if that was your experience with the school system?
Almost. No, I have a really bad feeling about like the teachers in like primary school and high school. I don't know, I had teachers that were so mean and like so like dictatorial, and I had the authority like trouble with authority like when I was in primary school. So I kind of saw everybody that was in a authority position as like wrong and like so and but I think even if like I had this maybe bias, I think I kind of trust the kid I was at the same time, because I feel that yeah, some teachers I had were horrible, and like just to give you one example, like uh, at like one of the teacher I had always made us copy, like every time you do something he's angry at, you have 5 minutes of copy, and like on but me, I was like too much I don't know, um, uh, how do you say a kid that is like crazy.
Yeah, well, and yeah, like Faldesar gets in a lot of trouble too, and he's got to go and see the therapist and write lines.
Yeah,
and that kind of
and
thing.
like the at that time this teacher sent me like see a therapist at the school, and it was like at the moment of my life that I was living like the big traumas and like the horrible things, and I realized recently that this therapist never asked me any question. It just made me copy. Like it didn't like I don't know, if there is like a crazy child, like you can suspect that something is going on, and you can try
Right.
to like, it's your job. But I don't know, I just find it like crazy that it didn't even.
Yeah, like what is that teaching him or teaching you? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't even ask what's going on. So but I don't know, I just see those adults that were like, that didn't care.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, uh, as we're wrapping up, one question that I wanted to talk to you about is the illustrations of houses
Mhm.
that the children are asked to do, because it comes up sort of twice in the book where um, there's like every kid is given one piece of paper and markers, and if they mess up their paper, that's all they get, and they're meant to draw it's their house but their home, right, the place where they live. And um, I think as you read the book, there's something a little bit more ominous about that idea of like, you know, because you question, I think by the end of the book, what is their home, where do
Mhm.
they live, but yeah, the image of the giant expanse of grass and the humiliation that comes from trying to depict where your home is. And can you talk about that?
Mhm. Yeah, and the home is, it's like really in our culture we almost fetishize home and like housing, and but home is also, can also be a violent place, and I also use a lot the metaphor of the uh, I'm not sure how to say it in English, but like under the earth,
Like subterranean.
yeah, but just when
Oh, the
home,
basement.
the basement, yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, like the metaphor of the basement as like also linked to like this hypocritical uh, uh, kind of culture that that is I don't know, the basement is where you hide things and where you do things that are not, that you don't want people to see. And
Mm-hmm.
so I felt that there was like this double meaning with the home, that home is like everything tells you that home is the place where you are safe, and that you can recover, and that you can hide, and that you can go to like be with yourself and to cut from the violence of the world outside. But home can also be the place where violence starts,
Mm-hmm.
and that yeah, it can, like the basement can become the like cradle of like the worst things also, even like so even this promise that like home is a safe place and is, for me, it's false.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it elicited for me that sense of like that very 1950s sense of, you know, the white picket fence and everyone pretends that everything
Mm-hmm.
is fine, and you put on this face for the world, and your home has to be perfect, but it's behind closed doors. Your home is also the only place where what really is going on goes on, you know,
Mm-hmm.
all of those secrets that no one is supposed to know. So yeah, that really, that seemed really visceral for me. Yeah, so this is kind of last chance for anyone with questions. I find with the virtual events, people sometimes are shy to.
Yeah, I understand it. I would be shy too, I think.
Yeah. You can ask anonymously. Yeah. I see Trisha appearing with her heart.
I'm just popping in. I love this conversation of home and that sense of home, and you find a lot of people writing about and exploring now this concept of home being within you rather than a building that you've gravitated towards or grew up in. I often said when I was growing up, I grew up in a lovely house with other humans, but it wasn't necessarily a home. You know, home is within. So yeah, it's a beautiful conversation. And if no one is going to pose any questions, we'll do our draw for the free book, if that's good. We have a copy of Kevin's book.
Oh, it matches my nail polish.
Yeah, it does.
You will love What You Killed for Liz Fulton. Congratulations, Liz. One more day to keep winning free books with Kingston Writers Fest. We're so thrilled to have the support of publishers and authors to be able to do this throughout the virtual festival. Everyone who pre-registers for an event qualifies for the chance to win a copy of the books. Latest books by the authors who are featured in those events. And tomorrow is another full day. We have our very last event coming up tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. And you can get the full lineup at kingstonwritersfest.ca. My mind is still reeling from this conversation. It was really fabulous. Thank you so much to both Kevin and to Aara. And a reminder that Kevin's books are available for sale at Novel Idea or your local independent bookseller. So thank you so much for joining us and supporting Kingston Writers Fest. Please be sure to check out tomorrow's programming, and we hope to see you on the screen throughout the day tomorrow. Be well.